Good day, good people, and welcome to Revolutionary Belovedness. I'm Robert Farrell. If you will, let me know in the chat section that you're able to hear me okay. And I want to welcome you, whether you are watching the live session or watching the recording. Thank you for being here. Last week we reflected on grief as an expression of love, and tonight we're going to extend that by reflecting on lament as sacred protest, giving voice to pain and injustice as a faithful response rather than resignation. But first, let's take a moment to settle in and center down. Settle into the body, letting the weight of the day rest into whatever surface offers support. Breath moves in gently and moves out slowly. And the shoulders soften with each release. A quiet space opens, wide enough to hold whatever wants to be felt. Attention comes to the chest, to the throat, to any tightness carried there. And permission arrives to let that tightness simply be present. Our gathering tonight begins with honesty. Sorrow is welcomed here, and so is the courage to speak it. Breath continues, steady and unhurried, preparing the heart to meet whatever this session offers. Friends, there is something in the human chest that recognizes injustice long before the mind finds words for it. A tightening rises in the throat, a heat gathers behind the eyes, and the body itself begins to testify. And our session this evening invites attention to this testimony and asks what becomes possible when pain is given voice rather than folded quietly into silence. It does seem we tend to try to put it down somewhere. So lament as sacred protest names this movement, the choice to speak sorrow aloud as an act of fidelity to love, to truth, and to the world still being born. Friends, this testimony begins somewhere quiet. Grief, understood through the practice of grieving, offers the ground on which lament stands. To grieve is to let the weight of loss register fully, allowing the heart to feel the true measure of what has been taken or broken. And this feeling carries information, revealing what matters, what has been cherished, what continues to call for protection and repair. Grief becomes the inward teacher, and lament becomes what happens when that teaching finds a voice ready to carry it outward. And carried this way, grief moves from that private ache into public witness. Lament takes the feeling grief has gathered and offers it as a testimony that others can hear and hold. This kind of offering asks courage, since voicing pain in open view exposes tenderness that could otherwise remain hidden. And that exposure becomes exactly the gift, a demonstration that suffering deserves acknowledgement, that injustice deserves naming, and that healing begins the moment truth finds breath. So what grief feels like in solitude, lament speaks in community, and this speaking is where protest becomes sacred. Friends, sacred traditions across the earth have long understood this speaking as holy. Psalms rise in anguished cry toward the heavens. Spirituals carry the memory of chains and cotton fields into melody. Elegies mark the passing of the beloved with formal ceremonial grief. And these traditions teach that sorrow spoken aloud participates in something larger than personal release, becoming liturgy, becoming prayer that trusts the sacred to receive even the rawest cry. And from this same root grows prophecy, since the voice willing to lament in public is also the voice willing to call communities toward accountability and repair. Standing before crowds, congregation, or the halls of power, prophetic figures have named suffering plainly, refusing to let comfort silence the truth of what communities are enduring. And their words often trembled with sorrow, even as they called for justice, showing that grief and courage rise from the very same breath, and that tears and truth-telling have always belonged together. Each tradition, in its own language and rhythm, affirms the same conviction. Sorrow given voice becomes sacred work, capable of shaping both the heart that speaks it and the community gathered to receive it. This courage to speak plainly is itself a form of faithfulness. And faithfulness of this kind moves quite differently than resignation, which settles into acceptance of harm or as permanent weather, treating injustice as an unchangeable feature of the world. Lament moves in an entirely different direction. Speaking pain aloud affirms that circumstances remain open to transformation, that wrongs remain wrong, and that love continues to labor for a different possibility. And this affirmation carries its own quiet defiance. To lament is to insist that the world holds capacity for repair, and that insistence becomes itself a form of hope planted in difficult soil. Each time that sorrow finds honest speech rather than quiet acceptance, faithfulness gains a fresh foothold in the world. And this same insistence takes visible shape whenever communities gather to mourn together publicly, whether at a vigil, a memorial, or a moment of collective silence. Names are spoken, candles are lit, voices crack and steady again, and something shifts in that gathering that solitary grief alone struggles to accomplish. Yeah, friends, shared lament binds strangers into common purpose, revealing how sorrow held together becomes solidarity, and solidarity becomes the seedbed from which moments for justice have always grown. Civil rights marches, those campaigns for workers' dignities, vigils after violence, memorials for the displaced, each finds its origin in people willing to grieve out loud, together, letting pain find open expression rather than staying sealed within. And underneath this public courage, the body continues doing quieter work. Breath deepens when grief finds expression. Tension in the shoulders releases its grip. Tears complete a cycle that holding back only prolongs. And voicing lament through song, prayer, poetry, or some honest, simple words allows the nervous system to complete what it has been carrying. And this physical release becomes the foundation on which public testimony can stand. A body permitted to feel fully becomes a body more capable of compassion, more available for the long labor of loving others through their own sorrow, and more ready to lend its voice when protest calls for it. And this readiness matters because numbing waits close by. When violence and injustice appear daily across news and feeds, a quiet temptation arises to grow accustomed, letting outrage soften into background noise. Lament interrupts that drift by insisting on full feeling rather than convenient distance, keeping the heart tender, keeping the heart responsive precisely so its voice remains available. And choosing to feel the full weight of each loss rather than letting familiarity dull its edges becomes itself a form of protest against a culture that would rather look away. So staying awake to what matters ensures that compassion remains a living current, ready to rise into speech rather than settling into memory. And that readiness becomes protest most clearly in the act of naming. Voicing pain publicly honors those who have suffered by keeping their stories present rather than letting them dissolve into inconvenient forgetting. Every act of naming the dead, telling the true history, or speaking plainly about harm extends dignity towards those affected and resists the erasure that injustice often deepens for its continuation. And elders who have carried grief through decades often teach younger hearts this same practice, showing how anger and tenderness can rise together, and how a community present for one another's mourning becomes strong enough to hold whatever comes next. Strong enough to hold whatever comes next. So passing this practice forward becomes its own form of inheritance, equipping each generation with a way of turning sorrow into sacred public speech. From this naming, lament flows naturally toward wider action. Grief that finds voice tends to seek further expression, organizing, advocacy, acts of repair, sustained commitment to justice. The energy once bound in unspoken sorrow becomes available for building, for showing up, for the patient work of transforming systems and relationships. So lament and justice seeking travel together, each strengthening the other. As voiced pain clarifies what must change, while collective action gives grief a direction worthy of its depth. And friends, a daily practice might begin simply, carrying this same movement from feeling into voice on a smaller scale. Setting aside a few quiet minutes to notice what has been troubling the heart offers an entry point. And speaking that trouble aloud, even when you're alone, or writing it as a letter meant only for the page, allows the practice of lament to take root in ordinary life. Reading the names of those lost to violence, lighting a candle for a community in pain, or joining others in a moment of shared silence extends this personal practice into communal form, training our hearts toward greater capacity for both feeling and faithful response. And friends, joy waits at the horizon of all this practice, present alongside sorrow rather than standing apart from it. Communities that learn to lament together often discover unexpected tenderness rising alongside grief, a closeness born from shared vulnerability. And this joy accompanies the ache rather than replacing it, reminding the heart that love capable of such deep grief remains equally capable of deep celebration. The same open heart that mourns fully and speaks that mourning aloud becomes the heart most ready to receive gladness when it arrives. So, friends, our session this evening offers this invitation: let sorrow become sacred speech. Let the ache carried quietly find breath, and let that breath join with others in testimony strong enough to call the world toward repair. Lament, understood this way, becomes far more than sadness expressed. It becomes faithfulness in motion, a prayer offered with the whole body, and a protest that trusts love enough to keep speaking even when the outcome remains uncertain. This trust carries its own quiet power, sustaining the long labor of justice with a steadiness that resignation could hardly match. So now let us take a few minutes to move into practice, into a guided inquiry, so that we might have a chance to experience this ourselves. Feel the weight of your body once again where it meets the chair, the floor, or the earth beneath. And let that contact hold for a moment, solid and unhurried. Breath moves in through the nose, filling low into the belly, and it moves out slowly, releasing whatever does not need to be carried right now. Notice the throat. So much lives there, coiled and waiting. Let your jaw soften. Let the space behind the collarbone open, even slightly, like a door left unlatched. Notice too the hands, rested or curled, and let them soften as well without asking anything of them yet. Somewhere in memory, a moment surfaces of witnessing pain that had nowhere to go. A memory of a headline, a memory of a name spoken at a vigil, a grief carried by someone else that became unexpectedly a grief of your own. Whatever it is, let that memory arrive without reaching for it. And notice, what did the body do in that moment? Did the chest tighten? Did the eyes fill? Did the hands want to move, to reach, to hold something that could not be held? Whatever it is, just breathe into that space now, not to fix it, not to explain it, only to be with it. Be with it the way one sits beside a river without needing to change its course. And allow your breath to slow even further, wide and patient, making room for whatever wants to be felt. What would it feel like to let that ache have a voice? Not the polished voice of argument, not the careful voice of composure, but the raw voice underneath, the one that has been waiting. Where does that voice live in your body? In the belly, a growl waiting to rise? Is it high in the throat, a cry pressed thin against the teeth? Is it in the hands waiting to beat against something solid, or in the feet wanting to root deeper into the ground? Let the breath find that place. Breathing in, gather the ache. Breathing out, let it loosen even slightly, even without words. Good. Now consider what has felt unspeakable. A sorrow set aside because there seemed no room for it, no safe container, no one ready to receive it. And let it be seen now in this quiet space, without asking it to become smaller or more convenient. Let it take up its full size for a moment here, where nothing needs to be managed. Consider, what might it mean to trust that this ache is not weakness, but evidence? Evidence of love, evidence of a bond with something precious enough to grieve. The body already knows this. Let it be believed for a moment. felt as warmth rather than argued as fact. Now imagine, if only in sensation, what it would feel like to speak this grief aloud among others who could hold it too. Not to be fixed, not to be reassured away, but only witnessed. Let your shoulders imagine that release, that widening, that permission. Let the chest imagine what might it feel like to be believed. Consider, what is one true thing this ache would say if it were given breath and nothing else? What would it ask the world to notice, to remember, to no longer look away from? And allow that question to rest without needing an answer yet. Because some things surface only in their own time, in their own season, when the ground feels steady enough to hold them. And let us carry that into the silence. Breathing in, I hold what aches. Breathing out, I let it speak. Breathing in, I hold what aches. Breathing out, I let it speak. Friends, take your time slowly and let your awareness widen. Feel the floor again, the chair, the air moving across the skin. Let the eyes open if they were closed. And carry this ache gently, knowing that it does not need to be resolved to be honored. May the voice inside find its moment. May the world receive what has waited long enough to be spoken. May the heart that grieves so fully be met in time with the tenderness it has already given to others. And may breath continue steady and kind, carrying this ache back into the ordinary rhythm of the day. Thank you for sharing in this practice together. I like to offer at the end of our time each Sunday 4 questions to deepen the dialogue. These questions will be available on the Mighty Network in the replay section, so you can see those there. But I will list them now, and if anyone has anything at all to share while I do that, you can do that in the chat. Whether you want to respond to the question or share something else, that's just quite fine. First, what sorrow have you been carrying quietly that might be ready to find voice among trusted others? That would be a very good journaling question. And next, where in the body does the difference between resignation and lament seem to live, and how does each feel distinct from the other? That's a very probing question to spend time with, to look at how it lives in your body. Next, who in your life, or your community, or your tradition has modeled the courage to grieve aloud in public, and what did that courage make possible? This is perhaps maybe a name comes to mind quite easily for this, and if you want to, you can share their first name in the chat. And next, what might it look like in your own circle or community to grieve together in a way that opens toward justice rather than settling into silence? Those are some rich questions, an opportunity for you to go deeper in tonight's practice. Again, I'll remind you, whether you were here for the live session or watching the recording, we thank you so much. The recordings are available on Mighty Network. They're also available on YouTube. The questions will only be available on Mighty Network. Also tonight, I'd like to remind you that just about 19 days from now will be in August, and August is going to be our transition month to move from Mighty Network to Substack for written words and to Crowdcast for video live streams. And I'm hoping that after that transition, we'll be also offering a second time of the week for another video live stream other than Sunday. So hopefully those things will come about in the coming months. Look for more information in your email about how and what will happen. Most of those transitions will happen automatically. You'll just start seeing a new section of email come in, and of course you can unsubscribe to any of those when you feel that you need to. Perfectly understand. So friends, that is it for this evening. I wish you a wonderful rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Good night for now. Blessings to all.